Good morning, and thanks for joining this Port of Los Angeles media briefing. I'm Philip Sanfield, the Director of Media Relations. Joining me here at our offices is the Port's Executive Director, Gene Soroka. Hello, Gene.
Good morning, Philip, and welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you once again. As you know, a tentative rail labor agreement was announced early this morning. This is great news for our nation's supply chain and all Americans. Rail plays a vital role at the Port of Los Angeles. 2/3 of goods arriving here leave California by rail, so it's a welcome development and we look forward to ratification. The system worked. Unions and rail companies negotiated in good faith, reaching a tentative agreement that will benefit both parties. I'm grateful to President Biden, his administration, and in particular, United States Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, who worked around the clock helping to negotiate an agreement. Many challenges still lie ahead on the rail front. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, and of course, take your questions as well. But it's important to note that this tentative deal avoids significant disruptions to the U.S. economy.
Thank you, Gene. Before we get back to rail, please share the overall picture of August cargo volume, including the breakouts on imports, exports, and empties.
Philip, I've mentioned in recent months that compared to last year's record volume, we would likely see cargo numbers begin to ease right about now. And that's exactly what we saw in August, with overall volume of approximately 806,000 20-foot equivalent units. We're about 15% off last year's incredible August and 9% below the all-important 5-year monthly average. Before we talk about the factors driving this change, let's dive into a few more August details. But please note, the numbers are not quite final, and we'll post them on our website as soon as they're available. Imports came in at 404,000 TEUs. That's 17% lighter than last August, and 12% off our 5-year August average. Exports remain sluggish, coming in at 100,000 TEUs, nearly flat compared to last year. We're now approaching 4 years of lagging U.S. exports. Empties back to Asia also softened. We finished at about 300,000 TEUs, which is an 18% year-on-year decline. That said, after 8 months, we've moved more than 7.1 million TEUs, and that's only about 1% behind last year's all-time record pace of nearly 7.3 million container units. Now let's take a look at what's behind these numbers. First, some of the cargo that usually arrives in August for our fall and winter seasons is already here. Cargo owners who expected longer lead times shipped earlier in order to guarantee delivery schedules. This just-in-case strategy versus the traditional just-in-time approach has been widespread in the market. Second, we're staring at 8.3% inflation straight in the eye. Tuesday's numbers were also disappointing. The Producer Price Index is up 9.8% since last year, and interest rates are also on the rise. Naturally, consumers are getting a little bit anxious, as are retailers. Some with elevated inventory levels have been discounting products to have more flexibility going into Q4. Additionally, we're starting to see canceled production orders out of Asia. And last, some shippers diverted cargo to East and Gulf Coast ports in order to avoid port congestion and as a possible hedge to West Coast labor contract negotiations. Consequently, those ports have substantial backlogs, while here in Los Angeles, we have very little congestion. All this to say that there are so many variables, and they continue to grow every day. We're watching retail sales, moves by the Federal Reserve, production out of China, and several other key factors. For example, locally, we're seeing a shift of some cargo from LA to Long Beach. We're monitoring this situation closely and expect it to be temporary. The bottom line, we're projecting lighter numbers in September and for the balance of the year compared to an unbelievable pace in 2021. But to keep things in perspective, even with this projected softer volume in the back half of the year, the Port of Los Angeles is headed toward the second busiest year in our history.
Gene, thanks for that overview. Before we get to media questions, would you please brief us on Dockside Operations?
Absolutely, Philip. To get a sense of marine terminal fluidity, let's look at vessel counts and dwell time data. First, there are just 11 container vessels within the 150 nautical mile area headed to the ports here in San Pedro Bay. That's compared to a high of 109 in January. We've collectively reduced the backlog of container ships by 90%, all while processing near record cargo volume. Beyond the 150-mile marker, 45 vessels are headed here from Asia to the Twin Ports. That's a good, solid number and 16% more than what we saw in January, which means our docks will be active in the weeks ahead. Over the last month, we've averaged 12 container vessels at berth each day at the Port of Los Angeles, which is 20% more than we handled prior to the cargo surge that started in mid-2020. Terminal fluidity continues to improve, particularly with respect to cargo moving by truck. Container dwell time for trucks on our marine terminals now stands at 3.7 days, close to our pre-surge average and well off last year's peak of 11 days dwell. We're now down to less than 2,000 containers designated for truck that are waiting 9 days or longer. That's compared to 32,000 last October. As mentioned, we now have a tentative rail agreement in place. That's great news, but there is much more work ahead. Rail has been challenged for months throughout the national freight network. Since spring, we've seen spikes in volume as well as backlogs and bottlenecks. On the volume side, as mentioned previously, boxes moving on rail have grown sixfold since February here at the Port of LA. The rail facilities in the interior of the United States, cities like Chicago, Kansas City, and Dallas, are jammed like port terminals were just last year. Getting those import containers off and into the domestic economy is key to improving rail flow at U.S. ports. With respect to backlogs, rail cargo is now waiting 7.6 days to get on a train. That's almost 4 times the normal dwell that we saw most recently in February. Today, we have about 28,000 rail containers waiting for on-dock trains. That number should be about 9,000 units. And 16,000 of those boxes are waiting 9 days or longer. Under normal conditions, that number should be 0. So there's still much more work for all of us to do. With today's announcement of the tentative agreement, everyone can now shift their focus back to the work on the ground. As we head into Q4, even with the rail challenges, the Port of Los Angeles marine terminals are in better shape than a year ago. We've nearly eliminated vessel backlogs, improved truck dwell times, and are now using data more effectively than ever before. As a result, we're more fluid and have the capacity to handle additional cargo here in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Gene. Let's take some questions from journalists. A reminder, please use the Q&A box below for questions and include your name and affiliation. First question is from Vanessa Yurkovich of CNN, and several others have asked similar questions about the impacts on rail even with a tentative agreement. Vanessa asks specifically, has port cargo been affected by the run-up to a potential strike and the halting of some goods earlier in the week?
Thanks for joining, Vanessa. We've seen minimal, if any, disruptions. Cargo flow, productivity, outgate truck moves have all been very good. And with some of the announcements that have come out from the rail companies since last weekend, there have been segments of cargo that will be impacted and there will be some disruption nationwide. But we're working with stakeholders using data through our port optimizer system and continuing to stay close to all parties to make sure any disruption is minimized. Appreciate it.
Gene, sticking with rail, this next question is from Bill Mongaluzzo of the Journal of Commerce. Is there any progress in reducing rail container dwell times on the docks and in convincing the railroads to increase the intermodal capacity they deploy to Southern California?
Thanks, Bill. And as you know, we're working around the clock with the Western Railroads and the PHL right here in Southern California. As we've described before, everything has a knock-on effect. Number one, cargo owners need to pick up their boxes faster in the interior. With that, we can load cargo onto these trains and get them out of Southern California much more quickly. The velocity picks up, we get the rail cars, engine powers, and crews back here for the next round of imports. And now with the tentative agreement in place, we can focus on the basics back here on the ground, getting that cargo moving, working account by account, and staying very close to all parties who are going to get this cargo moving faster than it has before. Thanks, Bill.
The next questions are both from Augusta Saravia from Bloomberg News and also Jeff Berman at Logistics Management. And it's regarding with the rail labor deal now tentative, are there any updates regarding the ILW PMA talks?
Thanks to you both for joining again, Augusta and Jeff. And as you both know, we're working with folks from the PMA member companies, the ILWU, the locals, every single day on all of our operations. I will not speculate on any contract date or negotiations. The experts are at the table negotiating. The rest of us are on the ground moving this cargo. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, the productivity has never been better. We're going to continue to do all that we can to maintain our competitiveness and keep folks back out there on the job, on the docks, moving all this business. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Gene. Next question is from Connor Wolf of Transport Topics. China's ports in Shanghai and Ningbo have apparently suspended operations due to a typhoon. On top of that, there are additional coronavirus lockdowns. Are we seeing or expect to see any impact from these developments?
Thanks, Connor. There's not a day that goes by without the supply chain in the news. Having worked in the region, when a typhoon flag is hoisted, the number one consideration is the health and safety of the citizenry, the crews, the assets, and the cargo in that order. So we'll get this system passed through quickly enough. The folks will get back on the job, but it's all part of seasonal weather patterns and doing business in the South China Sea. As we get back on the ground, yes, we'll be watching COVID lockdowns, the impacts, but as we saw during the summer, when many observers said we would get this deluge of cargo and the COVID-19 lockdowns in Shanghai would negatively impact us, it was the central government, leadership, and the port directors like our friend Yan Jun in Shanghai's Yangshan Deep Sea Port that continued to have a focus on the Trans-Pacific long-haul cargo and our market in particular here in Southern California. That caravan of cargo kept coming, and while there were impacts on the ground to manufacturing, sub-assembly, and transportation, the sheer grit and determination of our partners overseas kept that cargo flowing. Same thing here. We'll pivot forward and continue to move cargo. There'll be a little catch-up over the next couple of days, but I think we'll be in good shape and no major impacts to the supply chain. Thanks, Connor.
Thank you, Gene. Next question is from Colin Campbell of Supply Chain Dive. Is the port concerned about any long-term effects from the shift of some cargo we're seeing to the East Coast?
Colin, appreciate the question, and those of you who know me know I'm super competitive. I don't want to lose a pound of freight to any other port. But typically this happens, especially during contract negotiations, when some folks like to hedge. In this case, it looked a lot different, with 109 ships at anchor back in January and backlogs throughout the supply chain, along with bottlenecks being front page of the news. We'll continue to raise the competitiveness bar, adding value through digitalization, the work on the ground with our partners, and the great labor force that we have here in the ports and across the region. We'll continue to fight for every piece of freight that we can get and grow our business. More containers mean more man-hours mean more jobs, and that's our continued focus.
Thank you, Gene. Eric Watkins from Cargomatic, along with Augusta from Bloomberg, following up both on the holiday season. Regarding Q4 and the holiday season, where do you see demand going now that August inflation data indicates that inflation may be stickier than originally thought?
Augusta, Eric, thanks again for the question. Chances are it'll be a lighter holiday season than last year, which was the all-time best in our nation's history. As I mentioned, 8.3% inflation, higher than expected with the announcement on Tuesday. Wholesale and producer prices are still elevated, yet we've got the best job market in decades. Unemployment is the lowest it's been since the 1960s. The latest job report was hot, and the unemployment report, the new claims that just came out this morning, lower than some observers expected. So we still see this dichotomy between inflationary pressures, 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline, and all of us as American consumers buying more. Retail sales for August, just announced this morning as well, were up 0.3%. Some called it sluggish, but it's higher than we've been on record in a continuous pace for some time now. So here again, to pierce those all-time marks of last year may be a really large leap. The National Retail Federation also put out guidance earlier this week saying the back half of this year would see 3% less projected container volume than we witnessed in the final 6 months of last year. So we'll continue to watch these and other indicators, but also level set expectations around what the American consumer will do in the face of this generational inflation. Thanks again.
Eric is following up on that, Gene. With goods coming in early this year and to a degree last year, are we looking at a new kind of a peak season in the years to come, or do you think we'll eventually get back to the traditional peak season?
I don't know that we go back anywhere or replicate practices from history. More said, we've got to continue to hone this supply chain. It's kind of like an actor who continues to work on her craft every day on the stage, or a golfer who's trying to find that perfect swing. You're always trying to improve the supply chain. And we've got to be more resilient. Scale when necessary. If we fail forward and pivot. But the idea here is always to answer the needs of that supply chain. Staying closer to our partners and customers allow us to start seeing around corners and over hills so we can be more adaptable. It's all about progress, and we're going to continue to lead the way.
Thank you, Gene. A reminder to our journalists with us, please, if you have any more questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and include your name and affiliation. The next question is from Eric He at City News Service in Los Angeles. What have you learned from dealing with supply chain uncertainty over the past 2 years that may help as we enter the holiday season and next year, and also with the dock worker contract unresolved?
Well, Eric, thanks for joining. This supply chain's been choppy for the better part of 4 years now. Trade policy initiated by the last administration in Washington, where even the authors probably didn't think we'd see higher imports, lower exports, and the widest trade gap in our nation's history. So much so that at the end of 2019, the business here at the nation's largest port fell off a cliff by 16% because we had brought in just about every import commodity before new tariff milestones went into place. And as COVID-19 hit China, the central government shuttering the economy effectively and our manufacturing ties, we saw another 19% loss of business in the first 5 months of that year. The American consumer came roaring back in the summer of 2020, and we've averaged a peak season month every month for the past 2.5 years. So we'll continue to the question I just answered about being resilient, forward-leaning, using digitalization to be able to see upstream and better plan our land use, workforce, and machinery. A lot of this has got to continue to be a work in progress. And while some are lagging or maybe not adjusting to this, we'll continue to find the path forward, having big thinkers at the table and trying to find new ways to deliver to the American company and consumer. Thanks for the question.
Gene, Jacqueline Hurtado from CNN Español is asking what companies or items would have been affected by a rail strike, and is there anything that you could have done, that you could do to alleviate their worries now that there's a tentative deal?
Thanks, Joaquin. Appreciate you joining today. We feed, house, and clothe America. every possible product, component, and part moves through this Port of Los Angeles. In fact, as you know, the cargo traversing our facilities reaches each and every one of our nation's 435 congressional districts. While speculation abounds this morning of what could have been, we're focused back on the ground with everything that we can do to keep driving the American economy. 1 in 9 jobs are driven from this Port of Los Angeles and neighboring Port of Long Beach here in Southern California. That's more than 1 million paychecks every week for families who count on the work that we do. Now that we're past this, and as stated earlier, looking forward to membership ratification, everyone's resolve continues to be galvanized to improve the supply chain, ramp up our service delivery, and work on those areas that everyone knows we can do better on as a collective. Thanks for joining again, Joaquin.
Thank you, Gene. Next question is from Michael Lev from the Chain Mail newsletter. He's asking how long until the at-sea vessel backlog drops back to zero, and how long until container dwell times go back to normal, if there is a normal that will return.
Oh, Michael, I don't have the answer to either, but the progress and numbers really speak for themselves. While moving near records amount of cargo for the first 8 months of the year, and I believe we've set all-time monthly records 5 of those 8 months, we've been able to work that backlog from 109 down to 11 container vessels today. And according to the Port Optimizer's signal, co-designed with our friends at Wabtec, those 11 ships are sitting out there waiting to come in for work an average of 24 hours. We saw container ship wait times, or what we call anchorage times, earlier this year, 21, 28. I can recall even a ship sitting out there 55 days before getting berthing rates. So we've made a lot of progress. Again, there was no lull in this business to use as catch-up time. We continued to focus on getting this product out into the interior. And the biggest change, although everybody chipped in on ideas big and small, was that when importers started to pick up their cargo quicker, the fluidity of this port really began to open up, and we could do that much more cargo volume. Our own Aveen Sharma measures the output from the port. Many people count ships and containers coming over the wharfs, but his analysis continues to look at how much cargo we can get off our docks by rail and truck into the American economy. And these are subtleties that we can see and show improvement on quickly that will really move the needle. Appreciate you joining today, Michael. Thanks.
The next question is from Greg Miller of FreightWaves. Gene, you mentioned a shift of cargo from LA to Long Beach. How significant is this shift, and what do you think is driving that?
Well, there are some discussions, Greg, on the ground between union leadership and the folks over at APMT about health and safety measures around the automated area. And I understand that that should be resolved very soon, but I leave it to the experts to come to those conclusions quickly so we can get back to normal. For the month of August, our own Damian Young has told me that it was about 40,000 TEUs that moved from Los Angeles to Long Beach during this period, while the experts got the situation manageable on the ground. And for the month of September, we also may see some more cargo go across. Could be as much as 60 to 80,000 TEUs. Again, that'll be temporary. We want to keep the cargo flowing for the American people. That's number one. We'll settle this local issue pretty quickly and get back to the normalcy between LA and Long Beach very soon. Appreciate it, Greg. Thanks for joining again today.
Thank you, Gene. The next question is from Jason Arseno of Inside U.S. Trade. In June, Congress introduced the American Port Access Privileges Act, which will establish a secondary berthing preference for vessels servicing multiple ports in the U.S. or with significant cargo bookings of American exports. Does the Port of LA have a position on this legislation?
Jason, thanks for the question. Appreciate you being with us today. And for those who have followed us here at the Port of Los Angeles, we've been talking for years about getting the American farmer and manufacturer back in the international game. Early on, I said that the policies of trade in the previous administration were ill-advised, and I hold to that because we've seen irreparable damage to the American exporter. And we saw the dislocation of round trip and triangulated economics in the service sector. Although other factors are also key to this, we've got to find ways to open up this area. And we will work with everybody on the ground. Our policymakers, elected officials, our private sector partners, and our overseas colleagues to keep driving. I was just in Asia with Mayor Garcetti. We were in Singapore, Jakarta, Tokyo, and Nagoya trying again to drum up business, find ways to get our ag products and manufactured goods out to the Asian markets, which is our strength. We're going to keep working on that. Here, a little closer to home, we've worked with the International Dairy Foods Association and their great leader, Michael Dykes, along with Ed Aldridge and the CMA-CGM folks, to double dairy exports through the Port of Los Angeles this year alone. And nationwide, with the leadership of CMA-CGM, dairy exports out of the United States have grown by 50%. We've also put that same focus on the almond coalition, the walnut handlers, and other agricultural growers, ranchers, canners, and producers right here in California. And we're going to continue to do all that we can to get these folks back and connected with their customers overseas. Much work to do, but I am really encouraged by everybody stepping up, mostly on volunteer basis, to help get this program going.
Thanks, Gene. It looks like the last question is one more from Eric Watkins at Cargomatic. He's asking about federal funds coming into the port. He noted that Secretary Buttigieg was here a few weeks ago with a $20 million grant. What is that money going to be used for, and what plans does the port have for federal funding with respect to rail and other areas?
Thanks, Eric. And this is a big part of what we're doing today and the highest priority. Never in a generation have we seen the alignment between the federal, state, and local government led by Mayor Garcetti on how we need to focus on the supply chain. The spotlight's been on us for so long now, but it's never too bright. And with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act at the federal level, California Governor Gavin Newsom's budget, which includes $2.3 billion for our state's 11 municipal ports, we're off to the races. Now, a facility like the Port of Los Angeles with such financial strength, this money at the state and federal level helps us accelerate these projects and deliver them faster. Infrastructure takes time, and these will be long-term returns. But the $30 million that the governor assigned to digitalization here in California will really get us going with new modules on the Port Optimizer to help us connect with our warehousing complexes in the Inland Empire, the Central and Northern Valley, along with those around Bakersfield and southern areas, to our export agricultural markets. And my dream is to get this port-wide appointment system going so we can take advantage of latent capacity and manage better how we get this cargo in and out by truck. For the $20 million that Secretary Buttigieg highlighted during his visit last week, this will go to a utility facility on Terminal Island and grade separations, overpasses, so we don't impede vehicular, pedestrian traffic. We don't get in the way of school buses, bringing the kids back and forth during the day, commuters going to and from work. It'll also make safety a priority for those great truck drivers, our first and last mile ambassadors, to get the cargo in and out quickly. More importantly for them, to get those turn times down so they can earn more money in these great middle class jobs. So we're working all out and really appreciate the Department of Transportation, the Secretary himself, for having that great focus here on the Southern California ports. There was also another $3 million grant for that Port Optimizer at the federal level to help drive those new modules. So folks are seeing what we are, and this attention continues to pay dividends here at the Port of LA. Eric, thanks a bunch. Appreciate you following this important area.
Gene, that concludes our questions today. Back to you for some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Philip. I'd like to take a moment here to recognize the many people who design and oversee construction of our world-class infrastructure at the Port of Los Angeles. Our port's engineering and construction divisions work behind the scenes every day to bring ideas and blueprints to life. They are the visionaries who plan the infrastructure we'll need for decades to come, and that's no small task. Over the last 25 years, the port has invested more than $4 billion in capital improvements to ensure our port remains competitive, resilient, and a thriving economic engine. It's the engineering and construction teams who deliver these capital projects. Both teams' staff are currently tracking 160 capital improvement projects representing more than $1.1 billion in value. Their most recent success is the completion of a $65 million improvement project at our Everport container terminal, 2 months ahead of schedule and on budget. These improvements involve deepening two berths to handle bigger ships, which means greater container handling efficiency and capacity. 5 new shoreside power connections will help improve air quality, providing clean power to those ships. Others in the industry have taken notice. Just last week, the Los Angeles branch of the American Society of Civil Engineers named the Everport project as the recipient of its 2022 Airport and Port Project Award. Very well-deserved recognition. Our team is led by Tony Gioiello, Deputy Executive Director of Development, and Chief Harbor Engineers, Sean Sheristani and Dina Arianzalan. They've got so many great people working alongside them, and I congratulate all for their outstanding efforts. Thanks again for joining us today. Until next month, take care, everyone.